The Luminara Celestial Academy floated in geosynchronous orbit above Terminus 7, a planet so unremarkably perfect that it had been chosen as neutral ground for educating the galaxy's future diplomats, scientists, and leaders. The irony, of course, was that neutral meant boring. No extreme weather. No predators above Class 3 threat level. Gravity so gentle it made feathers feel heavy. The entire planet was essentially a padded room with delusions of grandeur, which made it the ideal location for teaching young beings from across the galaxy how to coexist without accidentally killing each other. The key word being accidentally. The Academy's founding charter, written approximately 3 standard centuries ago, had included a clause about accepting students from all recognized sentient species, provided they met the academic standards and could reasonably be expected not to murder their classmates. This worked splendidly for about 2.5 centuries. Then, humanity discovered faster-than-light travel, knocked on the galaxy's door with the social grace of a meteor impact, and suddenly that clause needed some workshopping. The problem with humans, the Galactic Education Committee quickly discovered, was not that they were stupid. Far from it. They picked up new concepts with unsettling speed, adapted to alien technology like they'd been using it their whole lives, and displayed a frustrating knack for creative problem-solving that occasionally bordered on what more established species politely termed unhinged. No, the problem with humans was that they came from Earth. Earth. A Class 12 gravity well spinning through space like a cosmic torture device, where the atmosphere was approximately 21% volatile oxidizer, the weather patterns could obliterate entire population centers on a whim. And the native predators included everything from microscopic flesh-eating bacteria to apex hunters that could bite through reinforced steel. A planet where 90% of the surface was covered in a substance that could kill you through inhalation, where tectonic plates ground against each other with apocalyptic enthusiasm, and where the locals had somehow decided this was fine and evolved accordingly. Deathworld didn't quite cover it. Deathworld implied a certain level of dramatic flair, like the universe was actively trying to kill you. Earth was worse. Earth was indifferent. It would kill you, sure, but it wouldn't even notice. The Academy had accepted its first human students 5 standard years ago, after extensive debate, 3 committee meetings, and one unfortunate incident where a counselor had made the mistake of calling humans fragile within earshot of the human ambassador, who had responded by challenging him to an arm wrestling match. The counselor, a Vexillian with 4 arms and a grip strength that could crumple Duraplast, had accepted with amusement. He lost all 4 arms. The surveillance footage of that incident was quietly deleted, though copies circulated through the galactic net with the persistence of a viral plague. The comments section alone could have formed its own dissertation on the galaxy's collective denial about what Deathworlders actually meant. Now, 5 years later, the Academy had 43 human students scattered across various programs, and the rest of the student body had developed an unspoken rule. Don't antagonize the Deathworlders. It wasn't an official policy. The administration would never admit to treating any species with special caution, because that would imply they were dangerous, and dangerous meant scary, and scary meant the Galactic Education Committee's insurance premiums would go up. But everyone knew. The humans were small, yes. Fragile-looking, absolutely. Their bones were made of calcium instead of sensible chitin or reinforced cartilage. They lacked natural armor, venom, claws, or any of the other standard predator equipment. They looked like they should be prey species, honestly, with their forward-facing eyes and their bizarre insistence on expressing emotion through facial contortions. And yet, there was something about the way they moved, the way they watched, the casual efficiency with which they handled tasks that required sustained effort. The unsettling fact that they could just keep going. Other species would tire, would need rest, would hit their biological limits and tap out. Humans would keep going. They'd complain about it, sure, often with a creative combination of profanity that translator programs struggled to process. But they'd keep going. The student currently walking through the Academy's East Wing corridor embodied every contradiction that made humans simultaneously fascinating and terrifying to their classmates. She stood at approximately 1.7 meters, which was short by most galactic standards, with the kind of build that suggested regular physical activity, but nothing excessive. Her hair was dark, pulled back in a practical style that kept it out of her face. Her clothing adhered to Academy standards. Simple, functional, unmistakably civilian. She looked, by all objective measures, harmless. The Krellian students who had been following her for the past 3 corridors did not agree with this assessment. But then again, they were about to make several poor life choices in rapid succession, so their judgment was already questionable. Krellians occupied an interesting niche in the galactic hierarchy. They were predators, certainly, with chitinous exoskeletons that could deflect most conventional weapons, mandibles that could shear through bone, and a tribal culture that valued strength and dominance above most other virtues. They stood taller than humans, bulkier, with forearms ending in serrated claws that could gut most species without much effort. On their homeworld, they were apex predators. In the galaxy at large, they were respected, feared, and generally given a wide berth in social situations. They were not, however, Deathworlders. Their planet was a respectable Class 7, with standard gravity, reasonable weather patterns, and predators that followed sensible biological rules about energy conservation and risk assessment. This distinction was about to become extremely relevant. Vexthor led the group with the confidence of someone who had never lost a fight and couldn't conceive of starting now. He was large even for a Krellian, his exoskeleton bearing the decorative scarring that marked him as a warrior caste descendant. Behind him came Zilnak, who served as the group's muscle despite the redundancy of that role, Quenra, who fancied herself the tactical mind, and Bortesh, who mostly just followed along because his social anxiety made refusing difficult. They had been planning this for 2 weeks, ever since the human had embarrassed Vexthor in advanced xenobiology, by politely correcting his presentation on predator evolution. The correction itself had been accurate, well-sourced, and delivered without malice. This, somehow, made it worse. Being challenged was one thing. Being proven wrong by a creature that looked like it could barely open a door without assistance was intolerable. The first retaliatory move had been subtle. Social isolation, spreading rumors about human aggression and instability, the standard juvenile dominance games that every species seemed to independently evolve. The human had ignored it with the kind of patience that suggested she'd dealt with worse. The second move had been the accident in the chemistry lab. A precisely timed stumble, a spilled container of solvent, and 3 weeks of the human's research project dissolved into expensive sludge. The human had simply stared at the mess, then at Vexthor, and started over from scratch without filing a complaint. This also made it worse. There was supposed to be anger, tears, some kind of satisfying emotional response that confirmed her inferiority. Instead, she'd just adapted, fixed it, moved on. So now came Phase 3, direct confrontation. Nothing too severe, of course, just enough to establish proper hierarchy, make her understand her place, maybe rough her up a bit, scare her into dropping out, or at least showing proper deference. They had chosen the maintenance corridor in the old wing specifically for this purpose. The area was scheduled for renovation, which meant minimal foot traffic. More importantly, the security systems were notoriously unreliable here. A known issue that administration kept promising to fix but never quite got around to addressing. The cameras glitched regularly, creating convenient gaps in surveillance coverage. What the Krellians didn't know, because they were young and stupid and operating on 3 weeks of wounded pride instead of actual planning, was that security cameras don't just glitch. Not in modern academy installations, not without help. The human knew about the cameras, had known for exactly 2 weeks, right around the time the harassment started. Had done some casual research into the security systems, found the maintenance access protocols, and learned some interesting things about how surveillance networks could be encouraged to develop temporary blind spots. She'd also grown up in Detroit, which gave her certain perspectives on conflict resolution that the Academy's counselors would definitely not approve of. The corridor stretched ahead, poorly lit and lined with maintenance panels that hummed with the building's vital systems. The human's footsteps echoed off the walls, steady and unhurried. Behind her, 4 sets of heavier footfalls tried for stealth and failed miserably. Krellians were many things, but subtle wasn't one of them. She could have gone a different route, could have stayed in the populated areas, could have reported the harassment through proper channels, though her previous experience with Academy administration suggested that would result in a lengthy investigation, multiple mediation sessions, and ultimately nothing changing, except now everyone would know she'd tattled, which would make the social situation worse. Or she could handle it here, now, and send a message that didn't require translator programs. The footsteps behind her accelerated. Decision time, apparently. She stopped walking, turning to face them in the middle of the corridor. The lighting here was particularly bad, casting shadows that made the Krellians look even larger and more threatening. This was intentional design, she'd noticed. Make the maintenance areas uninviting so students wouldn't explore them and accidentally electrocute themselves or whatever. Vexthor stepped forward, his 3 companions spreading out to block potential escape routes. Standard predator behavior, really. Establish dominance through positioning, cut off retreat, force submission through threat display. She'd seen the same pattern in nature documentaries, gang confrontations, and corporate negotiations. "You have been difficult to corner, human," Vexthor said, his mandibles clicking in what his species considered an intimidating gesture. The translator in her ear rendered his words with appropriate threatening intonation. "Always surrounded by others, always in monitored areas. Almost as if you were afraid." She tilted her head slightly, studying them with the kind of calm assessment that comes from growing up in an environment where threat evaluation was a survival skill. 4 opponents, each massing probably twice her weight, natural weapons, armor, reach advantage. Math wasn't great. Then again, math rarely told the whole story. "I prefer populated areas," she said, voice level. "Better lighting, less chance of tripping over maintenance equipment. You know, safety concerns." Quenra chittered something that didn't translate well, but was probably meant to be mocking. "Safety. Yes. The fragile Deathworlder worries about safety. How amusing." "Fragile is relative," the human replied. "So is safety. Speaking of which, you guys sure you want to do this? I'm happy to just forget this whole thing happened. We all go our separate ways. Nobody has to explain anything to medical staff." Vexthor's exoskeleton plates shifted in what might have been laughter. "You think you are in a position to threaten? There are 4 of us. You are alone. You have no weapons, no armor, no witnesses," the human interrupted, glancing up at the security camera in the corner. Its indicator light was dark. "Funny how that works out. This camera's been glitchy for weeks. Never seems to record properly. Probably won't capture whatever happens next. Zilnak cracked his knuckles, a gesture that worked surprisingly well across species. Then there is no reason to delay. You will learn respect, human. This will hurt, but that is how lessons work. The human sighed, a peculiarly human expression of resignation mixed with annoyance. You know what? I tried. Can't say I didn't try. Just remember that part, okay? When you're explaining this to the medical team. I tried to walk away. She shifted her stance slightly, weight balanced, hands loose at her sides. Not a fighting stance, not obviously, but something in her posture changed. The casual student demeanor dropped like a discarded coat, revealing something harder underneath. Vexthor noticed, but misinterpreted it as fear turning to desperate determination. Brave of you to resist. Foolish, but brave. I will make this quick. He lunged forward, one clawed hand reaching to grab her shoulder, intending to slam her against the wall and establish physical dominance. It was a move he'd used successfully in countless confrontations, leveraging his size and strength advantage to overwhelm opponents before they could mount effective resistance. The human wasn't there when his hand arrived. She'd moved sideways, not much, just enough that his momentum carried him past her intended position. As he stumbled slightly, trying to correct, she kicked the inside of his knee with the kind of precision that suggested practice. The joint bent wrong. Not broken, but definitely unhappy about recent developments. Vexthor snarled, spinning with his other arm extended in a backhand that would have sent her flying if it connected. She ducked under it, stepped inside his reach, and drove her elbow into the softer chitin at his throat joint. Krellian anatomy put a major nerve cluster right there, a vulnerability their armor didn't quite cover. His nervous system registered the impact and briefly considered shutting down in protest. Zilnak charged from the side, learning nothing from his leader's mistakes. The human heard him coming, the heavy footfalls impossible to miss in the enclosed space. She waited until the last possible second, then dropped flat. Zilnak, unable to stop his momentum, tripped over her prone form and crashed face first into Vexthor with the grace of a cargo shuttle attempting atmospheric entry without functioning thrusters. Quenra, watching this unfold with growing alarm, decided tactical thinking was overrated and simply rushed in swinging. She had 4 arms and knew how to use them, creating a flurry of attacks that should have been impossible to defend against. The human rolled to her feet, backed up 3 steps, and let Quenra overextend. Each miss required energy, required commitment to a trajectory. Humans had been studying martial arts for thousands of years, developing styles that emphasized efficiency and leverage over raw strength. The basic principle was simple: make them work harder than you do. After 6 or 7 wild swings, Quenra was breathing heavily, her strikes getting sloppier. The human had barely moved, just small adjustments, minimal effort. When Quenra committed to a particularly aggressive combination, leaving her center exposed, the human stepped in and punched her right in the thorax. Not hard by human standards, just a quick jab to test the armor. The armor held, but the force transferred through it, and underneath that armor was soft tissue that had evolved on a planet where predators respected each other's personal boundaries. Quenra wheezed, her respiratory system temporarily confused about its job description. Bortesh, demonstrating the survival instincts his ancestors had carefully cultivated, started backing away. Perhaps we should reconsider. Stand your ground, Vexthor rasped, having recovered enough to be angry about it. His throat hurt, his knee hurt, and his pride hurt worst of all. He charged again, this time with Zilnak, attempting to use coordinated attacks to overwhelm her. The human's response was almost casual. She grabbed a maintenance panel handle, the kind used for leverage when removing stuck panels, and yanked it free with a quick twist. Now she had reach, and more importantly, a metal bar to extend her threat range. Vexthor pulled up short, suddenly wary. That is cheating. That's tool use, the human corrected. Kind of humanity's whole thing. We're not naturally strong, so we invented leverage, and metallurgy, and orbital kinetic bombardment, but that seemed excessive for this situation. She swung the bar experimentally, making it whistle through the air. The Krellians spread out, trying to circle her again, but the corridor limited their options. She kept moving, positioning herself so they couldn't surround her, using the environment the same way they'd tried to. Zilnak feinted left, then lunged right. The human parried with the bar, the metal ringing against his exoskeleton with a sound that echoed down the empty corridor. The impact sent vibrations up both their arms. But she'd braced for it, and he hadn't. His follow-up strike was sluggish, giving her time to sidestep and crack the bar against his knee joint. Krellians had a lot of armor, but joints were always vulnerabilities. Basic engineering. You needed flexibility for movement, which meant less protection. Zilnak went down with a pained hiss, clutching his leg. "Two down," the human said, not even breathing hard. This was the thing about Deathworld evolution. You didn't get to be fragile. You got to have absurd cardiovascular efficiency, redundant systems, and the kind of stamina that came from ancestors who'd hunted prey by literally running after it until it died of exhaustion. Quenra and Vexthor exchanged glances. This wasn't going according to plan. The small, soft creature was supposed to crumble under pressure, not systematically dismantle them like malfunctioning equipment. They rushed together, trying to use numbers advantage. The human met them head-on, which was either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. She blocked high, ducked low, used the bar to redirect strikes rather than absorbing them directly. Every movement was economical, nothing wasted. The product of evolution that punished inefficiency with death. She caught Vexthor's arm with the bar, twisted, and levered him into Quenra. They tangled together, cursing in their native language while the translator gave up trying to render it in polite terms. Before they could separate, the human kicked Vexthor's other knee, the one she'd hit earlier, and he collapsed with a sound that was deeply satisfying to anyone who'd spent 2 weeks dealing with his harassment. Quenra tried to grab her, all 4 arms extending in a desperate grapple attempt. The human dropped the bar, ducked under the reaching limbs, and drove her shoulder into Quenra's center mass. Basic wrestling, the kind taught in high school gyms across Earth. Quenra went down hard. The wind knocked out of her. 4 Krellians incapacitated. Total elapsed time, approximately 90 seconds. The human stood in the middle of the corridor, breathing slightly heavier than before, but nowhere near exhausted. She looked at each of them in turn. Vexthor clutching his knee, Zilnak still down, Quenra gasping for air, Bortesh pressed against the wall, trying to become invisible. "So," she said conversationally, "we done here? Or do we need round 2? Because I've got a paper due tomorrow, and I'd really like to get back to the library." Vexthor managed to glare up at her, mandibles clicking weakly. "You? How? We are warriors." "You're students," she corrected. "Playing at being warriors. Actual warriors know when they're outmatched. You want to know the difference between your planet and mine? On your world, predators avoid fights they might lose because losing means injury. And injury means death. Makes you careful. Sensible." She crouched down to his eye level. and there was something in her expression that made him instinctively try to back away, despite his injuries. On my world, predators that avoided risky fights starved. So we evolved to take risks, push through injuries, keep fighting past the point where sensible species tap out. We're not stronger than you. We're just too stupid to know when to quit. And evolution rewarded that with survival. She stood up, retrieved the maintenance bar, and carefully reattached it to its proper place. You wanted to teach me a lesson about hierarchy. Consider it learned. I know exactly where we stand now. Question is, do you? The sound of approaching footsteps echoed from both ends of the corridor. Security, finally responding to whatever alarm had been triggered. Perfect timing, as usual. 2 guards arrived, their crystalline forms refracting the poor lighting into prismatic shards. They took in the scene. 4 injured Krellians, 1 unruffled human, and absolutely no useful security footage to explain what had happened. Report, the senior guard demanded, his translation matrix crackling with authority. The human shrugged. I was walking to the library. These 4 students appeared to have slipped on something and injured themselves. I was just about to call for medical assistance when you arrived. Quite fortunate timing, really. The guard's crystalline structure shifted in what might have been skepticism. He looked at the Krellians. Is this accurate? Vex Thor opened his mandibles to speak, caught the human's level gaze, and reconsidered several life choices simultaneously. If he told the truth, he'd have to admit that 4 Krellians had not only attacked a human, but lost decisively. The humiliation would be catastrophic. His family's reputation would suffer. He'd probably face disciplinary action for initiating unprovoked violence. Or he could take the out she was offering. Claim it was an accident. Eat the embarrassment of being seen as clumsy instead of weak. It wasn't a good option, but it was the least bad option available. Yes, he managed. We fell. Maintenance corridor. Poor lighting, should be more careful. The guard's structure shifted again, definitely skeptical now, but lacking evidence to contradict the story. He looked at the dark security camera. Camera malfunction in this sector. Convenient. Isn't it? The human agreed pleasantly. Technology can be so unreliable sometimes. I've heard these old wing cameras have been problematic for weeks. Someone should really look into that. Medical personnel arrived with floating stretchers, loading the injured Krellians with professional efficiency while asking questions about symptoms and pain levels. The human provided helpful observations about which joints seemed damaged, displaying knowledge of Krellian anatomy that was either impressively thorough or disturbingly specific. As they wheeled Vex's Thor past, he looked at her one more time. Why? He rasped. Why give us the accident story? She considered the question. Because you're going to learn from this. You're going to think real hard about assumptions, about who's actually dangerous, about picking fights based on what someone looks like versus what they're capable of. And you're going to remember that I could have destroyed your academic career and future prospects, and I chose not to. Call it an investment in your education. She glanced at the guards. Also, the paperwork for assault charges would be incredibly tedious. And like I said, I have a paper due tomorrow. Priorities. The medical team departed with their cargo, leaving the human alone with the security guards and the lingering question of what had actually happened. The senior guard studied her for a long moment. You understand, he said slowly, that we know something occurred here beyond simple clumsiness. Do you? She asked innocently. Because without footage, testimony, or witnesses, all you have is speculation. And speculation isn't grounds for investigation, is it? That would create a hostile educational environment, and the Academy is very clear about avoiding those. The guard's structure flickered with what might have been amusement. You have read the student handbook thoroughly. I'm a very diligent student. It's why I'm here, after all. To learn. Indeed. What are you studying, if I may ask? Xenopsychology with a focus on conflict resolution, she said, without a trace of irony. I find interspecies dynamics fascinating. All the different approaches to problem solving, the cultural variations in threat assessment, the way different evolutionary backgrounds create fundamentally different perspectives on violence and social hierarchy. It's quite complex. The guard made a sound that the translator rendered as resigned laughter. I suspect your classmates will become considerably more courteous in the near future. One can hope. Education should broaden perspectives, shouldn't it? The guards departed, leaving her alone in the corridor. She waited until their footsteps faded, then pulled out her datapad and made a few quick adjustments to the security system. The camera indicator light flickered back to life, its temporary malfunction mysteriously resolved. She continued toward the library, her pace unhurried, her expression peaceful. Behind her, the camera dutifully recorded an empty corridor with nothing unusual to report. The story of what happened in the maintenance corridor spread through the Academy with the speed of quantum communication, which was to say, instantaneously and probably violating several physical laws. The official version involved an unfortunate accident, poor lighting, and 4 clumsy Krellians. The unofficial version varied depending on who was telling it. But the core elements remained consistent. The Deathworld student had been cornered, and the Krellians had lost badly. In the medical bay, a Centaurian doctor examined Vex Thor's injuries with the careful attention of someone studying a particularly interesting puzzle. Remarkable precision, she murmured, her 4 eyes independently focusing on different damage sites. Each strike targeted joint vulnerabilities with almost surgical accuracy. One might conclude you were attacked by someone with extensive knowledge of Krellian anatomy and combat training. One might conclude we slipped on a wet floor, Vex's Thor growled. One might, the doctor agreed, if one were concerned with official reports rather than medical reality. Professionally speaking, I'm required to note that these injuries are consistent with your statement. Personally speaking, I would suggest you avoid maintenance corridors in the future, and perhaps reconsider your assumptions about Deathworld species. 3 days later, in Advanced Xenobiology, the human delivered her presentation on predator-prey evolutionary dynamics. Vex Thor, still recovering but mobile, sat in the back row with his 3 companions. When she finished, he raised his hand. "Question," he said, his voice lacking its previous aggressive edge. "You mentioned that Deathworld predators evolved persistence hunting strategies. Can you elaborate on the psychological adaptations required for that approach?" She smiled slightly. "Excellent question. Persistence hunting requires the ability to track prey over extended periods, maintain focus despite physical discomfort, and push past normal exhaustion limits. The psychological adaptation is essentially weaponized stubbornness, the refusal to give up even when every rational indicator says you should. That sounds maladaptive. It would be on most worlds. On Earth, it was the difference between eating and starving. Evolution doesn't care about rational. It cares about what works." "Fascinating," Vex's Thor said, and possibly meant it. After class, students gave the humans slightly more space in the corridors. Not fear, exactly, but respect. The kind of respect that comes from understanding that surface appearances don't tell the whole story, and that fragile is a relative term when applied to species that evolved on planets actively trying to kill them. The security footage from the maintenance corridor remained mysteriously corrupted, a technical glitch that investigations couldn't quite explain. The Academy's IT department eventually classified it as a random system error and moved on to more pressing concerns. The human continued her studies, maintained her grades, and never mentioned the incident. When asked about the Krellians' injuries, she expressed concern and hoped they recovered quickly, which they interpreted as either sincere kindness or the most sophisticated psychological warfare they'd ever encountered. Possibly both. The galaxy continued spinning, vast and complicated, full of species with different strengths, different vulnerabilities, different perspectives, shaped by billions of years of divergent evolution. And somewhere in that galaxy, on a small blue planet that really should have been labeled with more warning signs, humanity kept producing these bizarre, resilient, absolutely terrifying creatures that looked fragile and acted accordingly right up until the moment they didn't. The Galactic Education Committee updated their insurance policies, raised premiums for institutions, hosting Deathworld students, and added a footnote to the acceptance criteria about ensuring adequate security systems in maintenance areas. The security camera in the East Wing corridor worked perfectly after that, recording nothing but empty hallways and the occasional student hurrying to class, which was exactly as it should be. After all, the best conflicts are the ones that never officially happen, leaving nothing but healed injuries, learned lessons, and the quiet understanding that some species earned their designation as Deathworlders for very specific, very practical reasons. The human finished her paper on time, received high marks, and graduated 3 years later with honors. She went on to become a successful diplomat, specializing in interspecies conflict resolution, which absolutely nobody found surprising. Vex Thor also graduated, slightly more humble, significantly wiser, and with a healthy respect for species that looked harmless. He occasionally told the story of his accident to younger students, always emphasizing the importance of proper lighting in maintenance corridors and the dangers of making assumptions based on appearances.